You know, it's funny. My last two scripted videos before my break were a Mario Kart video and an Indie 3D Platformers video. And now that I'm back, my first two scripted videos are an Indie 3D Platformers video and a Mario Kart video. Funny how that works out. So, new Mario Kart game, eh? Seems to have ended up kind of divisive in ways I can largely understand. Me personally, I'm not huge on all the choices Nintendo made for this game, and I definitely don't think it was worth the price increase, especially here in Canada where it's $110. Thank goodness for that Switch 2 bundle. But despite all that, I have been enjoying Mario Kart World. And thanks to it, I was feeling an itch to talk about Mario Kart in a video again, though I did struggle a bit on what topic to go with. I briefly considered doing an updated top 10 Mario Kart tracks list, but then I thought of a different angle to take it. With that said, here's the plan. I'm going to be going through each of the Mario Kart games and giving you my top 3 favorite tracks in each game. That way, each game gets a chance to shine. Though before we begin, a couple things I want to note. I'm going to be picking from each game's Nitro track selection, so no retro tracks. With the exception of the Booster Course Pass, specifically the Tour tracks in it. I have previously tried to get into Mario Kart Tour, but it wasn't really my cup of tea, so I haven't really played much of it. But I do still want to talk about some of the Tour original tracks. So even though they're technically retros, I'm gonna make them viable picks for the Booster Course Pass. Also, while I'd say I'm pretty good at Mario Kart, I am not a high-level player. You generally won't see me pulling off speedrun tech or anything like that. And as such, I'm not picking these based on which ones have the best shortcuts or stuff like that. This is entirely just the tracks I enjoy the most. Which, yes, shortcuts can play a part in my enjoyment, but they're not a necessity. I'm also a sucker for good use of theming, so that can and probably will play a part in some of my choices. With that said, how's about we get this show on the road? Starting, of course, with, well, the one that started it all, Super Mario Kart's an interesting one when it comes to this topic. The game overall does have a fair bit of first game syndrome, but I'll be real, I don't hate this game. It ain't one of my favorite Mario Kart games, but I don't think it's outright bad either. Heck, I'd argue there's kind of a fun learning curve with its looser control scheme. As for the game's track lineup, I think it's alright. Sure, it's limited in visual variety and design scope, but like, no duh, it's a Super Nintendo game, and there's still some neat stuff to do with the tracks, even between ones that share the same settings. For example, the way Donut Plains escalates with each new variant, going from just simple tricky turns, to incorporating Monty Moles as an obstacle, to the broken bridge you gotta hop over. Yeah, it's simple stuff compared to what Mario Kart's got now, but for the scale the game's limited to, it ain't bad. Now for which tracks in the game are my favorites? Well, there were a couple I considered. Much as it's mocked for how much it's returned as a retro track, Mario Circuit 3 is actually pretty solid in its original run. I also like the Ghost Valley tracks, I think they're simple but effective, and while it wasn't a pick I considered, Bowser Castle 2 having this random dead end that straight up tells you to stop is just funny to me. Plus it makes for a neat feather shortcut. But with that said, here are my top 3 favorites. Starting things off, and maybe I'm crazy for saying this, but my number 3 is Vanilla Lake 2. Like, in the past, I really didn't like the Vanilla Lake tracks due to the slipperiness and those annoying ice blocks and, well, being bad at Super Mario Kart. And granted, I'm still not huge on Vanilla Lake 1, but Vanilla Lake 2 I actually quite enjoy. Sure, it's still slippery and still has those annoying ice blocks, but 1, the blocks are placed less haphazardly than in VL1, and 2, the giant hole in the ice makes for a pretty solid stage hazard. Making successful hops over the cracks in the ice is just fun, especially so if you've got a feather to clear more ground. Even just getting a hand at the slipperiness and darting through the ice blocks, it feels pretty satisfying. Now true, the track layout itself isn't super compelling, take the hole out of the track and you've just got a circle. But as I'll go over more later on, a basic track layout can still work if you do interesting things with it, and Vanilla Lake 2 does enough to win me over. Again, I could be crazy for saying this, I know this track isn't super well liked, but hey, that's just how opinions be sometimes. Now as for my number 2, gotta go with Rainbow Road. It's the one that started a series-long tradition, and I'd argue is still the hardest one. Between Super Mario Kart's looser controls, the complete lack of rails, the fairly narrow road, the flashy thwomps, this is a brutal final challenge. But for a game like Super Mario Kart, I think that's really fitting. It's just a pure gauntlet of a race, and one that feels good to pull off. On top of that, it's got some pretty standout visuals compared to the rest of the game's lineup, and that's before mentioning the music. Super Mario Kart's got a pretty good soundtrack, not amazing, but pretty good, and its Rainbow Road theme is one of its highlights. It really adds to the spectacle of this finale. But yeah, for the first Rainbow Road, they handled it well, and thanks to the angle it takes, I'd argue it still stands out nicely after all these years of Rainbow Road. Which now brings me to my number 1, which is none other than Mario Circuit 2. Now, kid me really liked this track because, ooh, big ramp! But as an adult, I think the track layout accommodates Super Mario Kart's looser steering controls pretty well, especially as an end of Mushroom Cup track. It's not like a steep difficulty spike, but it's got you getting used to trickier turns you can expect in the later tracks, and I think it does that well. I also really like this track because, ooh, big ramp! Super Mario Kart doesn't do a whole lot with verticality outside of using the feather, so having a track that incorporates a ramp like this is pretty standout. But on top of that, there is some strategy with how you choose to use it. You can play it safe and aim for the clearer outer part of the turn, or you can aim for the inner part of the turn that has a bunch of pipes. It's riskier, but can be more rewarding if you pull it off, and I think that's neat. But yeah, I don't have a lot more to say about Mario Circuit 2. It's just a pretty solid time. With that said, let's move on to Mario Kart 64, which I've got mixed opinions on. This was my first ever Mario Kart game, so I do have some nostalgia for it, but actually playing it nowadays, yeah, this one's kinda rough. It ain't all bad though. For one, it's got one of the greatest voice clips in gaming history. But also with the stronger hardware and all, the devs were able to broaden their horizons more with the tracks, and there are some cool ideas brought to the table. Cool ideas that I think later games largely do better, granted, but that's beside the point. With that said, this was actually one of the easier top 3s to figure out, because while there's some good use of atmosphere in some tracks, like Toad's Turnpike and Frappe Snowland, and there's some neat set pieces in others, like in Calamari Desert, only a handful of the tracks really stick the landing for me. So, how's about we talk about those? Now, in previous Mario Kart discussion, I've said that my favorite 64 track is Yoshi Valley, but admittedly, I'm not as huge on it anymore. That said, I do still like it quite a bit, so much so that it's taken the number 3 spot. The more maze-like design it goes for is pretty unique compared to the other tracks in the game. While yes, that only really applies to the first half of the track, and there are some routes that are outright better than others, it does still make for an interesting time, especially given the extra gimmick. Now yes, I know it's because they couldn't track the placements due to technical issues, but the whole keeping the placements a mystery until people pass the finish line aspect, I think is the final piece of the puzzle that helps make this track's gimmick work for me. It's not perfect in execution. I haven't even mentioned the whole falling to the bottom of the valley before you respawn thing, which is both kinda funny and kinda annoying, but I think it's a neat idea that's overall done well enough to be engaging. Now for my number 2, I've got one of the raceway tracks. So for the record, I don't usually hate the circuit tracks in these games. Sure, they tend to be basic, but like, yeah, that's kind of the point. They're not usually among my favorites though, not unless they take those extra steps to be more memorable. Mario Circuit 2 did that with its big ramp, and coincidentally, the raceway track I'm picking also has a big ramp. That's right, my number 2 is Royal Raceway. So let's get the more superficial stuff I like about it out of the way first. Big ramp? Not as mechanically compelling as Mario Circuit 2's, but still a neat set piece. Being able to drive around the courtyard from Mario 64? Really cool Easter egg. But on top of those, Royal Raceway feels nicely built around 64's looser control style. The twists and turns of this track fit the game's handling like a glove, and as such are satisfying to pull off, especially that last stretch that risks a tumble into the water if you mess up. Or you could just bypass that part altogether if you've got a mushroom. It's nothing mind-blowing per se, but it makes for a solid time in the context of 64. And hey, it ended up making the jump to Mario Kart 8 pretty well too. On that note, I do find it funny that they quite literally gated off Peach's castle in the 8 version. Like Peach was tired of people driving in her courtyard or something. Now getting into my number 1, I know I said this was one of the easier top 3s to figure out, but the track I decided to pick for my number 1 was not what I thought I'd be picking. But upon replaying 64 for this video, it's the one that stuck the landing for me the most. So with that said, my favorite 64 track is Koopa Troopa Beach. While I'm kind of mixed on Mario Kart's output with beach tracks, I do overall enjoy me a nice beach level in games, and I think Koopa Troopa Beach is a solid one. It's got a pleasant atmosphere and some fittingly tropical music, and while yes, the track layout is pretty simple, 1, it's a Mushroom Cup track, but 2, it still does some interesting stuff with that layout. For example, the use of the tide constantly going in and out. It can add an element of risk for if you want to cut a turn a bit more. Same applies with the presence of the crabs when the tide's out, especially in the last stretch of the track. Do you choose the ramps to try and get an item? Or do you keep to your speed while risking hitting a crab? But the best part of the track design is that tunnel shortcut. It can cut down so much of the track that I don't blame the devs for nerfing it in Mario Kart 7, but with it requiring either a mushroom or a well-timed hop off a narrow ramp to access it, it makes it feel like a rewarding shortcut, and a risky one at that if you mess up and crash into the rocks. This and the tide adds a nice depth to an otherwise pretty straightforward Mushroom Cup track, and that coupled with the aforementioned aesthetic and music overall has me liking it a lot. I know it already got the retro treatment in 7, but I'd be down to see Koopa Troopa Beach come back in a newer game. I'd say it could fit well in World, but, well, SNES Koopa Beach 2 kinda committed some identity theft there already. I never thought a Mario Kart track could be considered a criminal, but here we are. This now brings us to Mario Kart Super Circuit, the first ever handheld Mario Kart game, and one I've got an interesting relationship with. As some of you may recall, I used to really not like this game, but with every time I've revisited it, usually for some kind of Mario Kart video, I've gradually grown to like it more and more. And on this most recent playthrough, it's finally clicked with me. I really like Super Circuit now. It's got that same sort of fun learning curve with the controls that Super Mario Kart had, while adding in elements from Mario Kart 64, such as the larger variety of track themes. Sure, the track design is limited in scope, but Super Circuit makes the most of that with interesting layouts and some gorgeous backgrounds. And as such, the game has a pretty solid lineup of tracks. Also, it's technically the first Mario Kart game to have retro tracks, so that's pretty neat. So yeah, I had a few different possible choices for this top 3. Riverside Park is pretty fun, Sunset Wilds has that great time progression effect and some pretty neat obstacles, Broken Pier's a fun challenge, Cheap Cheap Island's got a nice background and a kinda ridiculous shortcut that I'm fond of, and Sky Garden's pretty great too, complete with nice scenery and music. But as good as those tracks are, they didn't quite make the cut. So, here are the ones that did. At number 3, I've got Lakeside Park, a track that I was actually kind of afraid of as a kid. The volcanic eruption and the fireballs that came down that I was terrible at avoiding at that age. I don't know, kid me found it scary. Nowadays though, I think it makes for a cool set piece and hazard. Sunset Wilds may have the gradual sunset into nightfall, but Lakeside Park's sky growing dark as the volcano erupts I think is just as cool of a visual touch to the track. But on top of that, the track itself is just fun to race on. If I hadn't made it apparent yet with some of my earlier picks, I really enjoy the windier tracks in these earlier Mario Kart games, ones that accommodate the looser steering nicely and making hitting those turns feel rewarding. And Lakeside Park scratches that itch as well. Also, I know I said I'm not making my choices based on speedrun tech, but Super Circuit's got some crazy shortcuts that I'm actually somewhat able to pull off. And Lakeside Park's got an especially fun one that's tricky to land, but cuts a good chunk off the end of the lap. Yeah, I definitely think I treated you too harshly in the past, Super Circuit. Moving on to number 2, we've got the track that I thought was going to take the top spot when I started making this video. Because even back when I didn't like this game, I was quite fond of Ribbon Road. Now back then, it was largely because of the aesthetic. I really dug the birthday present look it went for, which does still play a part in why I like it so much. Like I said earlier, Super Circuit makes the most of its limited scope, and fun theming like this is a prime example of that. But racing on a ribbon isn't all this track has going for it. Like Lakeside Park, Ribbon Road's got that windiness I really like in tracks from these games, making for a fun track to drift around, added on with the numerous boost pads that can keep that sense of speed up. It's a nice mix of style and substance if you ask me. Also on that note, while it is a very big departure both aesthetically and design-wise, I am fond of the makeover this track got in 8. Though, the 8th version does lack those crazy Super Circuit shortcuts, which sure enough, the original Ribbon Road's got one too. I'm starting to see a pattern here. But yeah, like I said, I was originally expecting Ribbon Road to be my number 1 when I started making this video. But on this recent playthrough, there was a specific track that really clicked with me. One that played a huge part in changing my outlook on the game as a whole. And that honor belongs to this game's rendition of Rainbow Road, aka my new favorite Rainbow Road in the series. On the surface, it's got some nice visuals, some fun music that has its own distinct style from other Rainbow Road themes, and some creative obstacles we don't often see on Rainbow Roads. But what truly makes this Rainbow Road so good is its use of jump ramps. The edges of the track are coated with these, which initially make for a good hazard. Don't want to fly off the track and all. Until you realize that these are the key to pulling off some absolutely ridiculous maneuvers. Like, my goodness, messing around with the jump ramps on this track to pull off crazy skips is insanely fun. No joke, while recording my Super Circuit footage, I actively went into time trial just to experiment with what kind of nonsense I could do here with 3 mushrooms available. Spoilers, you can skip like a whole quarter of the track with just 1 mushroom. Like, how many Rainbow Roads do you know of that can be finished in less than a minute? Long story short, this is a really fun Rainbow Road that feels so distinct from all the other ones, and I really like it for that. And with that, we now arrive to the Mario Kart game I am always down to gush about, Mario Kart Double Dash. Not just my favorite Mario Kart game, but one of my absolute favorite games in general. I love Double Dash. I love the way it controls, I love the double character system and the unique power-ups they all get, I love just the pure chaos of it all. It's such a blast to play every time I do so. And this absolutely could just be my bias showing, but Double Dash has one of the strongest lineups of tracks in the entire series, which gives me plenty to work with when picking my favorites in the game. Even some of the circuits have some solid stuff going for them, with Luigi's circuit being probably the best starter track in the whole series. Point is, I had a lot to work with for this top 3, but believe it or not, this one was easy too, because there's 3 tracks in particular that have stood above the rest for me for a while now. With that said, let's get to my number 3 pick, which goes to the hustling and bustling streets of Mushroom City. This, in my opinion, is the traffic track formula perfected. The traffic makes for compelling obstacles without feeling too overbearing, coupled with the different types of vehicles resulting in different types of wipeouts. So there's benefit to try and get an opponent in the way of certain vehicles if you can. But okay, Mushroom Bridge has all this too. What makes Mushroom City so special? Well, 2 things. 1, I'm a sucker for the look of cities at night, and Mushroom City is certainly a looker in that regard, even all these console generations later. But more importantly, 2, the track design. Mushroom City's big selling point is its use of splitting paths, which is both fitting thematically with the track being set on the roads of a city, and with no obvious better route. You've got this exciting rush down the streets as you crisscross with your opponents. It all makes for a really fun take on this track type. And like I said, I personally feel like they've yet to do it better than this, which makes it all the more unfortunate that they've yet to bring this track back. But let's not linger on that. How's about we move on to my number 2 pick? Now, like I said a moment ago, something I love about Double Dash is the pure chaos of it all. Between the game's arcadey approach to its physics and controls, combined with the expanded roster of items, many of which being utterly bonkers, Double Dash can quickly become an utterly insane time, and that's something I really enjoy about it. And I don't think any track in this game embodies that insanity better than Baby Park. This track right here is a prime example of why I don't immediately write off tracks just for their layouts. Like sure, Vanilla Lake 2's just a circle, but it's got interesting hazards that are fun to avoid. Sure, Koopa Troopa Beach layout-wise is basic, but it's got nice atmosphere and a cool shortcut and good risk and reward design. It's not all about the shape of the track, it's about what you do with it. And on the surface, Baby Park doesn't actually do a lot with it. It doesn't have any stage hazards or set pieces beyond its amusement park background. It's just an oval. But because this oval is in Double Dash of all games, Baby Park quickly goes from just an oval to a war zone. You're gonna have items all over the place, but the most brilliant part of the design is actually the middle portion. You can't drive over it or anything, but moving projectiles like shells, they can go over it. So now you're never safe. You can use this strategically to throw items at opponents on the other side of the oval, or you can fear for your life as a Bowser shell menacingly bounces from one side of the track to the other. Honestly, if any track were to translate perfectly to Mario Kart 8's using tracks as battle mode arenas idea, which was dumb to clarify, it would be Baby Park. It practically is a battle mode map already. And while that level of chaos may not be everyone's cup of tea, it absolutely is mine. There was a time where my siblings and I would boot up Double Dash just to do multiple 9-lap races of Baby Park. And that was some of the best Mario Karting I've ever experienced. What more can I say? It's Baby Park. And the fact that Mario Kart DS managed to make this track boring is an absolute crime that I've yet to forgive it for. But we'll get to DS soon. First, time to talk about my favorite Double Dash track. Which on that note, some of my longtime viewers may think they know where I'm going with this, as I've previously called DK Mountain not just my favorite Double Dash track, but my favorite Mario Kart track in general. But as I've gone over already, opinions can change. Yoshi Valley is not my favorite 64 track anymore, I've grown to really like Super Circuit, and DK Mountain is still my favorite Double Dash track. Granted, I don't know if I'd call it my favorite Mario Kart track overall, I'd have to give that some more thought, but yeah, I still love DK Mountain. The general concept of rocketing off to a volcano and then descending back down it, I still find really compelling and fun. And while the whole cannon gimmick has been done a whole lot more in Mario Kart games since Double Dash, there's still something really special about how it's executed here. I've talked about this in a video before, but DK Mountain was the first track I ever saw from Double Dash back when it came out, and 6-year-old me was blown away at seeing this set piece for the first time. But it really helps that the rest of the track beyond the barrel cannon is a lot of fun, with the twists and turns perfectly fitting Double Dash's drifting mechanics, and the boulders, ravine, and rickety bridge making for compelling obstacles. The music's admittedly not one of Double Dash's catchiest, but it fits the jungly setting of the track quite nicely, and then gets to do so again with Down Down Jungle, another solid jungly track. But yeah, I just love DK Mountain. It is partly nostalgia, which I'm not ashamed about, but even without factoring that in, I I just find it a super solid track to race on. And while I think its Wii and 8 Deluxe renditions aren't quite as strong, largely due to how drifting feels in those games, DK Mountain's definitely better suited to Double Dash's controls, I do still like racing on it in those games as well. We now move on to Mario Kart DS, which, So you know how I said that every time I've revisited Super Circuit, I've grown to like it more? Yeah, I think the opposite's the case with DS. Every time I revisit it, I seem to like it less. It does have some neat stuff about it. Mission mode was a fun concept, for example, but I'm not a fan of the overall gameplay feel. Like, this game loves making you go off ramps and hills only to land with a thud, and it just doesn't feel good to me. Couple that with some nasty item RNG, and honestly, kind of a mediocre track lineup. Now don't get me wrong, DS does have some solid tracks. Some really solid ones, actually. But for me at least, those are largely exceptions. Most of the Nitro tracks I find either just okay, or I outright don't like them. And that's not even factoring in the retro tracks, which became a series mainstay in this game, and weren't really that great. But we're not here to talk about the tracks I don't like, just the ones I do. So which of them are my favorites? Well, we're kicking off this top 3 with what's probably the most popular track in the game. So much so that past me kinda spited it because I thought it was overhyped. But playing through DS again, nah, Waluigi Pinball is genuinely a solid track. Not my personal favorite, obviously, but it takes an already creative idea and executes it pretty well. I'm a big fan of inner mechanism aesthetics, and while not my favorite example of so in the series, wink wink, Waluigi Pinball launching you off and sending you down the road to the pinball table as if you were a pinball, that's a really cool idea. Sure, it doesn't allow for much shortcut potential, but I don't think every track needs that so long as the track itself is still interesting. And with the curvature of the road to the pinball table, alongside actual pinballs rolling down as obstacles, Waluigi Pinball still got plenty of fun racing to go with its fun visuals. I also love how in the DS version, when you leave the pinball table, it plays a sound as if you were the pinball going into the gutter. That's a great attention to detail. And it's a real shame they got rid of that in later versions of this track. But let's press on to number 2, where we go from an over-the-top high-concept idea to one of the most mellow tracks in DS. Because sometimes even a simple idea can end up being memorable when done strong enough. And that's exactly the case for me with Delfino Square. On paper, driving around a seaside town loosely based on Delfino Plaza, not the most exciting thing in the world. But this idea is nailed in the execution. For one, the choice of making it an autumn track was a great call. Autumn's my favorite season, partly due to the vibrant colors of the leaves. So giving this track that aesthetic already added some nice visual to the usually summery Delfino environment. But on top of that, the design of this track is handled quite solidly, taking you around the plaza, down the streets of the town, and through a pier littered with crates to avoid, or potentially hit on purpose given some hold mushrooms. It's a nice variety that ties together quite well, genuinely feeling like you're driving through an actual town. The addition of the piazzas at the starting line area add to that feeling, making it feel like the residents excited to be seeing a race going on in their hometown. It's a nice touch. Top it all off with a big old drawbridge coated in speed panels, and you've got a track that's both pleasantly charming and fun to race on. Also jumping the gun a little bit, but it's one of the few retro tracks in Wii that I think was actually made better, largely due to being able to trick off the drawbridge. And now we get to my number 1 favorite track in DS. And like with DK Mountain and Double Dash, some of my longtime viewers may remember what my favorite track in this game is. And upon this revisit, yeah, TikTok Clock is still my favorite DS track. So remember what I said at the start, how I'm a sucker for a good use of theming with Mario Kart tracks? This is probably the most prominent example for me. I'm a big fan both of the theme of time and media, and like I said earlier, of inner mechanism aesthetics. So a track set within a giant clock that incorporates the clockwork into the track design and obstacles? Yep, you've sold me. But that's not to say it's all style and no substance. It's a very fun track to race on too. The use of the gears especially I find quite compelling, going along with their current direction to keep up your momentum, made even more fun by the fact that they swap directions throughout the race. Couple that with obstacles such as sweeping clock hands and swinging pendulums, and a tune that leans into the clockwork theming, and yeah, this one's absolutely one of my favorites in the whole series. And then they brought it back in a Mario Kart game that I much prefer playing, and went above and beyond with the clockwork aesthetic. The glide ramp does kinda negate the gears portion of it though, but overall, I love how it turned out in 8. Next up, we've got Mario Kart Wii, one of the most iconic, but also one of the most love-or-hate games in the series. I do have my issues with it, such as, like DS, how brutal the item RNG can get, but overall, I am very fond of this game. Part of that is nostalgia. I played this game a ton in my preteen and teenage years, but coming back to it, I still think it's fun to play. The introduction of the trick system especially is such a game changer. Suddenly all the hills and bumps and ledges in the tracks actually serve more of a purpose. It also helps that Wii's got a really strong lineup of tracks. Well, really strong lineup of Nitro tracks. The retros are still kind of lacking for the most part. But yeah, a lot of the new tracks in Wii are solid, giving me a lot to pick from. Mushroom Gorge, Coconut Mall, DK Summit, Maple Treeway, Dry Dry Ruins, Rainbow Road. It was actually pretty hard to narrow it down to just a top 3, but I managed to do so let's get to those picks. And kicking off this little list, a series staple is finally showing up on one of my top 3s, a Bowser's Castle track. Bowser's Castle has been around since the very beginning, and despite them not making any of my top 3s before this, there have been some pretty solid ones in past games. But Mario Kart Wii's take on the Koopa King stronghold has been a personal favorite for a while now. On the surface, it hits a lot of the same beats that most Bowser's Castle tracks hit, but not only does it largely do those well, the extra elements it brings to the table are what push it up for me. From the ramp of a bridge taking you into the unstable opening hallway, to the half-pipe section with the Mecha Bowser spitting fireballs down the middle, creating a risk and reward system if you want to try and take the most straightforward path, to the lava spewing geysers in the final stretch that you're able to trick off of, it all clicks together nicely and makes the standout Bowser's Castle track for me at least. Side note, I've always found this billboard of Boo and Drybones really amusing, entirely because I grew up with Mario Party 7, and that render comes straight from Party 7's box art. So preteen me playing this and seeing this was like, oh cool, Mario Party 7 reference! Nowadays, it's just a funny little reusage of assets they already had, which, hey, that applies to Mario Kart Wii in general. Now we carry on to my number 2, and I cannot believe this one's never made it into any of my previous talks about favorite Mario Kart tracks. Maybe it's recency bias from it finally making its return in Mario Kart World, but coming back to Wii for this video, Toad's Factory was a total highlight. It's kind of surprising that something as simple as a factory hadn't been done for a Mario Kart track up until that point. But hey, they finally did so, and it made for a really fun track. Making it specifically an item box factory was a great call, and it makes the most of this theming with conveyor belts coated with item boxes, alongside other obstacles like the giant compressors. Though if we're talking conveyor belts, I gotta mention that sharp turn with the 2 conveyor belts that swap directions throughout the race, changing up how you tackle that turn on each lap. It's such a simple idea, but makes for such a fun set piece. Actually, that describes Toad's Factory in general really well. It doesn't go too nuts with the concept, given this is a Mushroom Cup track, but they do enough with it that it makes for a really fun track to race on. And that's before mentioning the music. The tune for Toad's Factory is 100% one of my favorite track songs, not just in Wii, but in the whole series. Top 5 easily. That said, it does lead to my one nitpick with the track. The song resetting when you exit the factory. I have admittedly never liked this, and because of this inclusion, including the start of the final lap, the song restarts 4 times during a regular race. Just let the song play out, please! Thank goodness this wasn't carried over into the Mario Kart World version. Also, side note, the Mario Kart World version of this track is so good. But now we get to my number 1 of Mario Kart Wii, and admittedly, I was confident on what my pick was going to be going into this project. And sure enough, my prediction was correct, this spot's going to Koopa Cape. So between this and Koopa Troopa Beach in 64, it seems like Koopa's got a good track record for, well, good tracks. Now granted, this one's not on a beach, but it does still do some cool stuff with water. Okay, actually, that's an understatement. That river absolutely makes this track as enjoyable as it is. Like, the track starts out fine with the cliffside portion, but racing down the river and getting increased speed from the water flow is a compellingly fun time, especially with how twisty the river gets. Hope your drifting game's good, but it only gets better once you're in the pipe, getting both some beautiful underwater scenery and a twist on the river flow gimmick with the inclusion of the spinning zappy things. There's a great sense of risk and reward with keeping to the river while trying to avoid getting zapped. Couple that with some fun, bouncy music and the aforementioned underwater scenery making it one of the better lookers of Wii, and you've got a thrill ride of a track that, unfortunately, hasn't been done justice in either of its retro returns. Like, I get on paper why you'd want to incorporate the underwater driving to the pipe portion, but removing the river flow and spinning zappy things from it? And that's before they awkwardly slapped anti-gravity into the 8 Deluxe version, but I'm just gonna stop before I go on a rant. Regardless of its later renditions, Koopa Cape in Wii is a great time. It was my favorite Wii track as a kid, and it still is now. Great job, you little turtle guy. And so we move on to Mario Kart 7, which, yeah, it's a Mario Kart game, alright. Like, I don't dislike this game or anything, but out of all the Mario Kart games, this one feels the most there, if that makes sense. Like, even its main gimmicks, the glider and underwater driving, those would end up returning in the Mario Kart everyone played for a decade, so it doesn't even really have that going for it. And as for the track lineup, I think it's kinda hit or miss. The game does contain some pretty underwhelming tracks, as well as, for me at least, probably the most forgettable track in the entire series. Seriously, I replayed this game fairly recently, and I can barely remember a thing about Daisy Hills. That said, it does also have some solid tracks, very solid ones in fact, so deciding on my top 3 wasn't a struggle or anything. In fact, I do actually have a couple honorable mentions. Woohoo Loop and Maka Woohoo were both fun tracks and great references to Wii Sports Resort, Shy Guy Bazaar is a really unique desert track, and Piranha Plant Slide used to be just kinda there for me, but I've come to appreciate it a lot more over time. So what did I like more than those tracks? Well, let's find out, shall we? So at number 3, we've got ourselves the second Bowser track for this video. But this time, it's not Bowser's Castle, because that track, Double Dash leitmotif aside, is rather underwhelming. Nah, it seems like Bowser invested his track design money into an entire city this time around. With previous games' city tracks all being traffic tracks, Neo Bowser City is a cool and unique take on the setting, going all in on the dystopian futuristic city aesthetic, made even better with the stormy weather as you're racing, which in turn also adds rain puddles as hazards, so hey! The use of Toad's Turnpike leitmotif was a nice touch on the presentation too, I really dig it. But on top of having a really fun aesthetic, Neo Bowser City has that windy track design that I've sung praise for in previous entries. 7 may not have the same loose control scheme that earlier Mario Kart games had, which helped make tracks like this so fun for me, but even still, hitting drifts on the twists and turns of this road feels great. Couple that with a nice little cut you can take using the glider, and you've got one of the most standout Bowser tracks in the whole series. Maybe Bowser should try investing in other types of tracks more often. And while on the topic of tracks that go all in with their aesthetics, my number 2 is arguably the best in that regard in Mario Kart 7. That's right, it's time for Melody Motorway! Or, as it's known here in North America, Music Park. Melody Motorway is still a way better name though. But yeah, music theme levels tend to be really cool in games, and Music Park is absolutely no exception. Not only visually, but audibly. Like, it's one thing to have you driving down piano keys and xylophones as part of the road, but to have them make their instrumental noises as you do? Absolute perfection. Pretty much everything about this track leans into the music theming. The trampoline platforms being tambourines, the bouncing musical notes in the last stretch that give you a trick chance going on beat with the music, even the seemingly less fitting piranha plants are still bopping along with the tunes. And don't get me wrong, the track itself has some fun turns to tackle and a neat tambourine trampoline shortcut right at the end, but it's the theming and how all out they go with it that really carries it. And that's before mentioning the visual glow up it got in 8. The track already looked nice in 7, but now it looks stunning. But yeah, Music Park's just a great idea done greatly. Still a shame we got the worst track name, but I won't harp on that anymore. I just now realize I wrote a pun. And now that takes us to my favorite Mario Kart 7 track. But what could be better than a melodic masterpiece like Music Park? Well, I'm sure some of you have been able to guess which I'm going with. So I won't linger any longer. My number 1 Mario Kart 7 track is Daisy Hills. Okay, yeah, in all seriousness, it's Rainbow Road. I know I said Music Park is arguably the best in regard to aesthetic, but this game's take on Rainbow Road gives it some good competition. This is a stunning looking Rainbow Road, and with the amount of variety this track has compared to other Rainbow Roads, there's basically never a dull moment while racing, both visually and design-wise. Making it a 3-section race instead of 3-lap allowed them to get real creative with the layout, and they take full advantage of that fact. Drifting across the rings of a planet, bouncing across a moon with giant chain chomps, which oddly makes for the second time a Rainbow Road used chain chomps of all things as hazards. The tube that gives you both regular speed ramps and glider ramps, giving you a chance to either glide down the final stretch or stick to the road, with both having their own benefits. There's a lot to this track that makes it feel special and stand out both to Mario Kart 7's track lineup and to other Rainbow Roads. And it's just so much fun to experience. And that music. It's not the first time they've used leitmotif of the 64 Rainbow Road theme, Double Dash has it beat there, but man, it uses it so well. I wouldn't quite call this my favorite Rainbow Road in the series, Super Circuit's rendition wears that crown now, but this is definitely my runner-up choice. And while it's not quite as good as the original, I am so glad they brought this track back in the Booster Course Pass. Also, side note, can I just quickly mention how Rainbow Road really carries 7's Special Cup? Like, DK Jungle, Rosalina's Ice World, and Bowser's Castle all feel so lackluster, especially as endgame tracks. And then you got Rainbow Road in contrast, just hitting it out of the park. Poor track's back must be in agony. Alright, here we are now at Mario Kart 8, the Mario Kart that's been infesting households since 2014. That sounded a lot worse than I intended. But yeah, even though we had this as the most recent console Mario Kart game for over a decade, this one's still a great time, especially with the 8 Deluxe version. And post Booster Course Pass, there's almost 100 tracks in this game, so there's a lot to pick from. Or at least, that would be the case if I was counting retros, and if I wasn't doing the Booster Course Pass as its own section. So in base game 8 Deluxe, there are 25 Nitro tracks, which does still give me a lot to pick from, just not a lot. And while they're not all hits, quite a lot of them are. Mario Kart 8 introduces some pretty great tracks, which gave me plenty to pick from for my top 3. Toad Harbor's a fun time, with the trolleys serving as both good obstacles and good trick opportunities. Sunshine Airport's a cool idea that lands pretty solidly, especially with flying off the runway. Electrodrome goes all out with the disco party aesthetic and has a fun use of anti-gravity. Bowser's Castle, while not my favorite rendition, is a solid challenge with some superb music. And Excite Bike Arena's technically not got much going on, but the randomly generated layout and just the fun of chaining tricks from hill to hill, it's a good time. So yeah, like I said, there's some really good stuff to pick from. So with that said, let's get to the top 3. And starting it off, we've got easily the best icy snowy track in the whole series. You know it, you love it, it's the one, the only, Ice Out Pie! Can't even say that jokingly. Number 3 is Mount Wario. While not the first Mario Kart track to take the concept of heading down a snowy mountain, Mount Wario takes the idea and pushes it to a whole new extreme, largely thanks to it being a 3-section race instead of 3 laps. In fact, unlike most 3-section races that still end with you crossing the line you started with, Mount Wario is one of a small handful in the series that never actually loop. As such, it's able to fully commit to the going down the mountain idea, and it does so with so much flavor and variety. Like, it'd be one thing if it was just a downhill snowy mountain, but jumping out a plane to start the race, followed by such a variety of set pieces like icy twists and turns, a waterfall cavern, a dam with boost pads sliding down the side, a forest full of splitting paths and logs to trick off of, and finally a slalom course that ends off with a ski jump to the finish line. And the best part, no portion of this track feels underbaked. They're all fun to race through, and they all meld together and transition into each other perfectly. So you get a nice variety of settings and obstacles, and it's a super exciting ride the whole way down. It's simply another case of a great idea done great in execution, and the sooner it gets to return in a future Mario Kart game, the better. But let's leave the wishful thinking behind and get to my number 2, which coincidentally, if you were to play the cups in order, would be the very next track after Mount Wario. That's right, it's time for some Cloud Top Cruise. Now, like with Mount Wario, this isn't the first time this kind of theme's been tried in Mario Kart before. In Cloud Top Cruise's case, it does the same Beanstalk and Clouds track theming that Sky Garden did. But once again, like Mount Wario, it all came down to execution, and Cloud Top Cruise executes its concepts with flying colors. Because it doesn't just call it a day with clouds and beanstalks, no. Thanks to a transitional part with one of Bowser's airships, which makes for a nice contrast in turning compared to the wider turns you had among the clouds, you're flung right into the heart of a thunderstorm, rushing down boost pads as they gradually get struck by lightning, ending with a breath-catching glide back to calmer pastures just to do it all again. The contrast between the two halves of the track and their levels of intensity balance each other out so well that I feel the track wouldn't be nearly as good if either half was removed. They both provide their own flavor of fun, one prioritizing windy turns, and the other prioritizing just pure speedy adrenaline. And the way the music dynamically shifts to match the tone of the track is just the icing on the cake. Though, as some of you know, I'm a sucker for a good use of leitmotif in music, and incorporating the Gusty Garden theme from Mario Galaxy into the composition, that's one real good use of leitmotif. Even after a decade straight of Mario Kart 8, I've yet to feel tired of the exhilaration that a run of Cloud Top Cruise provides. It's just a wonderful track, and of the 16 Nitro tracks Mario Kart 8 originally had at launch, this one's easily my favorite. Which means that to find my number 1, we're gonna have to delve into the DLC tracks. Man, I still remember when the very idea of Mario Kart getting DLC was this novel. Like, what do you mean we're getting more characters and tracks post-launch? Nowadays, in a post-tour and post-Booster Course Pass world, it's not as novel, but back then it sure was. But arguably the most notable thing about the DLC? The inclusion of stuff from other Nintendo franchises. Now granted, I'm not much of a Zelda guy, so while Link and Hyrule Circuit were neat inclusions, I was not the target audience there. Animal Crossing I had more experience with, so its additions clicked a bit more with me, but still, wasn't quite the highlight for me. That honor went to the F-Zero tracks. As a longtime F-Zero fan, the inclusion of tracks based off the series was right up my alley. And just when I thought Mute City was a blast of a time, In came Big Blue. Man, where do I even begin with this one? Well, for starters, like Mount Wario, Big Blue is not only a 3-section race, but it similarly doesn't loop. So the devs had the freedom to go all out with the track design, and they absolutely do. Big Blue is a wild ride of twists and turns, let alone in anti-gravity, filled with boost pads and trick opportunities aplenty, Toad's Factory-style conveyor belts going opposite directions, Koopa Cape-esque rushing waters that keep that adrenaline going, all the while in anti-gravity. It's just a perfect fusion of so many good ideas, and the track uses them to the absolute max. And if that weren't enough, the extra miles they go in regard to it being an F-Zero track. For one, like Mute City, having the recharge stations on the side of the track, giving an opportunity for a coin refill, that phenomenal cover of the Big Blue theme, that saxophone player is having the time of their life, and even just in the little things like the classic... Even if I wasn't an F-Zero fan, I'm fairly certain I'd still love this track. It's just an insane thrill ride that never ceases to be an absolute joy. But especially as an F-Zero fan, this track is practically perfect in my eyes. I love Big Blue in this game. Not just my favorite of Mario Kart 8's tracks, but absolutely a contender for my favorite track in the series as a whole. I still gotta give that some more thought though. So that covers the half of 8 Deluxe we had at launch, but now it's time to talk about the Booster Course Pass. Now yes, the BCP overall really wasn't at the same level of quality as the base game in a lot of areas, especially visually, but I still do appreciate it as a whole. Speculating each wave and what could be in it before the inevitable reveal was a fun process. And while not every track was done justice, quite a few were, and some were even elevated. Like if I was counting retros as a whole, SNES Bowser Castle 3 would absolutely be a contender. But, like I said at the start, this section is only going to be covering the tour tracks and the quote-unquote new tracks, which are all basically tour tracks as well. Between the city tracks and the new tracks, I've got 20 options to pick from for this. But it was actually kind of easy to narrow down because admittedly, I'm not huge on a lot of these. I do like the idea of the city tracks, and I'm glad they were able to be preserved, but a lot of these city tracks kind of go in one ear and out the other for me. Not that they're outright bad, mostly, but for me at least, a lot of them just aren't that memorable. And the new tracks are a case of cool ideas with hit or miss execution. Like, speaking as a big fan of the Christmas season, Merry Mountain is so disappointing. In the battle I literally just made up right now of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe versus Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, CTR wins the Christmas track round with Gingerbread Joyride, easily. Point is, there's only a handful of the tour tracks in the BCP that stand out to me for the right reasons, but fortunately, they stand strong. Paris Promenade is a pretty good first impression for the Tour City tracks. Nothing mind-blowing, but still a good time. Athens Dash is kinda clunky at points, but it's fun to race on and is easily the most unique Tour City track setting-wise. Ninja Hideaway is also kinda clunky design-wise, but it's a solid enough track with really good music. And Singapore Speedway starts off pretty good and ends on a really strong note, making it one of the more memorable city tracks for me. But all these don't quite make the top 3, so let's get to the ones that do. Starting things off, we're on a race to the bathroom. That sounded less weird in my head, with my number 3 being Squeaky Clean Sprint. If you ever needed proof that you can make a compelling kart racing track out of basically any idea, this right here is prime proof. Like, this track is literally just set in an everyday bathroom, and yet it does so much with the concept in such fun ways. Well, actually, I say an everyday bathroom, but this bathroom's kind of in shambles. The sink's on the verge of overfilling, the bathtub drain's got a wedding ring deep inside, there's soap all over the floor, and starting from lap 2, the toilet's spewing water. That said, while all these would make for a mess to clean up, they also make for compelling obstacles and set pieces, with that spout of toilet water allowing you to reach an alternate path up to a glide ramp, which allows you to reach another alternate path up above the sink. Couple that with some catchy music, and you've got a track that goes above and beyond for what's literally a bathroom track. On that note, I've actually got a bit of a silly headcanon with Squeaky Clean Sprint. I think it's set in the same house as 8's rendition of Ribbon Road. Like, for context, I was the type of kid who'd drive my toy cars around the house as if they were racetracks, and I can totally picture a kid, having gotten some new toy cars with a racetrack as a present, now using the bathroom as a racetrack for his toys. And I guess nearly flooding the bathroom to make the race more interesting. Man, talk about an irresponsible hypothetical kid. Actually, on the topic of kids, let's now segue to a track based on a babysitting game. My number 2 is Yoshi's Island, if you couldn't tell. So first and foremost, out of all the tracks in the series directly based on Mario adjacent franchises, so like Luigi's Mansion and DS, DK Jungle and 7, stuff like that, Yoshi's Island is easily one of the best, both as a track and as a tribute to its source material. I would have said the absolute best, but DK Spaceport and World does give it steep competition. The extra lengths this track goes to as an homage to the original Yoshi's Island is kinda nuts, to be honest. Between the enemies wandering around, the variety of environments, the use of the question mark cloud as the trigger for a pretty cool alternate route, and even just little things like the coins now being Yoshi coins, the alternate route ending with the end goal ring, and even the finish line jingle changing to Yoshi's Island level and fanfare. The devs went above and beyond with the tribute aspect of this track, but even as a track, it's just fun to race on. It's got a nice meld of settings and obstacles, allowing for bits of gliding and underwater driving, and heck, this track's got one of the best uses of the glider in the game, since activating that alternate route requires precise aiming while gliding. It's very much a case of both style and substance, and while yes, the track design maybe could have a little bit more to it, I think it does enough with it that it stays compelling even after the excitement from the various references wears off. It's just a really solid track that also honors a key part of the franchise's history, and I love it for that. Honestly, Yoshi's Island almost took the number 1 spot in the Booster Course Pass for me, but there's one track that I've got some personal bias towards. So with that said, my favorite track of the Booster Course Pass, or at least of the tour tracks in it, is none other than Vancouver Velocity. So, for quick context, I used to live out on the west coast of Canada, so I've been to Vancouver more times than I can count throughout my life. It's not the best city in the world or anything, in fact it's got problems aplenty, but I do have a soft spot for it. So when I found out that Mario Kart Tour had a Vancouver themed track, I really wanted to experience it for myself. But again, Tour didn't tend to be my cup of tea, so I never got a chance to try it there. So once it was apparent that tour tracks were going to be a priority for the Booster Course Pass, I eagerly awaited for Vancouver Velocity's inclusion. It was easily my most wanted track for the BCP, even more than some of my favorites from other games. Then it finally showed up in Wave 5, and I had an absolute blast with it. For one, even beyond my Vancouver bias, I do think that as a track itself, it's one of the stronger Tour City tracks. It's genuinely fun to race on. But with my Vancouver bias, man, this track is so cool. For one, making the Olympic Cauldron one of the main landmarks of the track was such a great call. I've always loved how it looks. But then lap 1 having you go down the Capilano Suspension Bridge, followed by the park's Treetops Adventure as an anti-gravity section, which by the way, they do decorate the treetop bridges with lights for the Christmas season. It's really pretty. But then lap 2 having you drift along through Stanley Park, before taking you to the rink of Rogers Arena, well, without the licensing of course. And while lap 3 does have you treading some of the same ground as before, having you race through the public library area is a great touch. And that's without mentioning all the other landmarks visible throughout the track. Heck, they use the Gastown steam clock as the posts for the starting line. Like I said earlier, this number 1 pick is largely personal bias, but frankly, I don't really care. They incorporate so many of Vancouver's landmarks in such cool ways, and it helps make for a fun and compelling track to race through. Also, setting it at night was a great call, because now it's even prettier. And that finally brings us to the latest of the series lineup, Mario Kart World. Now, like I said at the very start, I have been enjoying this game, but it's not without its issues. The free roam, while fun at points, is pretty lacking. Nintendo is way too insistent on pushing the intermission route system, or at least was. They apparently addressed that in the most recent update. Unlocking characters through multiple layers of RNG is really, really dumb. And speaking of characters, what the heck is up with this character select screen? Did Nintendo suddenly get allergic to sub-menus?
Look how much longer it takes to select Wario.
And yeah, all in all, I don't think this was worth an upcharge in price. But from a pure mechanics and gameplay feel standpoint, this has been the most fun Mario Kart game since Double Dash for me. Wall riding and rail grinding and the charge hop do so much to make this game as engaging as it is. Even just little things like being able to trick multiple times in the air now, like just playing this game feels great. And what helps a lot with that is the track selection. Now granted, thanks to the intermission system, I don't think the game maximizes on the track selection as much as it could. But that said, the tracks in this game are really good. And I'm actually really thankful that I went the no retros route with this video, because deciding my top 3 for World just from the Nitro tracks was brutal. No joke, I've got literal hours of footage recorded of me just racing in a handful of tracks over and over and over again, just to try to figure out which ones I liked the most. Salty Salty Speedway is a pretty fun one with some great wall riding portions. DK Spaceport being a gauntlet of varied challenges while following the structure of the original Donkey Kong arcade game is such a cool idea that's done excellently, and while it is arguably a bit style over substance, the new Rainbow Road goes above and beyond in so many ways that I can't help but love it. Probably my third favorite Rainbow Road behind Super Circuits and Sevens. But now, here are my current top 3 favorite Nitro tracks from Mario Kart World. And to start off this little list, how's about I ease you all in with something on the calmer side? A track that's peaceful, relaxing, one might even say chill. Actually, nah, we're gonna start with the craziest Bowser's Castle yet. That's no exaggeration, by the way. This is easily the most insane a Bowser's Castle track has ever felt. It is on the shorter side compared to most of its archetype, but it makes the most of its smaller length, being an absolute roller coaster of a track, especially in the latter half. That molten lava tunnel into a storm and onto the skybound section, one of the few segments of the game to give you permanent boosting, it just feels so exhilarating. Even the theming of the track being a more industrial Bowser's Castle. It's pretty standout for this staple. But all this is before mentioning some of the shortcut potential. Because of the new mechanics in Mario Kart World, a lot of the tracks have so many opportunities for pulling some crazy maneuvers, and Bowser's Castle is no exception. Now granted, a lot of the insane stuff you can do in this track is completely out of my ballpark, but even the stuff I am able to do feels so good. That wall jump off of the shipping container back onto the track, even if it's not necessarily faster, just feels great to pull off. And oh goodness, the music. Like, we've known Bowser to have some fantastic themes in the past, but like, dude, chill! Okay, don't actually. This song goes as nuts as the track itself, and I love it. But yeah, this is easily my favorite Bowser's Castle track in the series now. And I'd argue it's one of the few tracks that actually works well in the intermission system. It feels fitting as the end point of a long drive, and it's thrilling enough that even just one lap feels satisfying. Also, hey, in the route you take to Bowser's Castle in the Grand Prix, you also go through Big Donut from Mario Kart 64. And I like Big Donut. So if a track that insane and exciting only takes my number 3 spot, what in the world tops that? Well, I'm glad you asked that, me. And we don't have to travel far on the map to get to our next stop, because my number 2 is the game's other lava-based track, Dry Bones Burnout. Now, I think if we're talking solely from a concept perspective, this is my new favorite track in World. Like, a volcanic Dry Bones track is a neat concept as is, but then making it a Dia de los Muertos track? Whoever at Nintendo thought of that idea deserves a raise. But also, if World gets more character costumes post-launch, Dry Bones needs a mariachi costume now. Waluigi can't be alone in the festivities. But theming is just one part of what makes Dry Bones Burnout such a cool track. The other part is the track design. Layout-wise, there is so much going on. Pretty much at every point of this track, there's at least 2 or 3 different routes you can take. Upper paths and lower paths, Ice Outpost-esque split paths, areas you access through rail grinding, areas you access through wall riding and wall jumping, areas that require all the above. This track really takes advantage of World's new mechanics in such varied and fun ways, all on top of the great aesthetic and fittingly festive music. Also, I hadn't mentioned this in the Bowser's Castle segment, but something cool I like about Mario Kart World is the changes they made to lava in this game. Instead of just dying instantly, falling in lava slows you down and burns you, and you gradually sink in. But if you've got a fast enough speed, usually via a mushroom, you're able to drive over the lava. And this is something that Dry Bones Burnout's track design takes advantage of, giving you shortcut opportunities by cutting through pools of lava. Like I said, there is so much going on with the track design, but not in a way that feels overwhelming. It's super fun to experiment with what kind of routes you can take through this track, and it makes every run through this fiesta an absolute delight. And sure, other tracks kinda have that going for themselves too, but the execution in Dry Bones Burnout's case, combined with the theming, has me especially hooked. This track is just a blast to play through, and I debated for a fair bit on if this was my number 1 or not. But it didn't quite make the top spot. So that begs the question, what did? Well, considering my favorites so far have been these grandiose tracks with tons of crazy shortcut potential, you may think my number 1 will follow suit. But believe it or not, it doesn't. Comparatively, my number 1 is quite a bit smaller in scope. Despite this though, it's a track that's still visually captivating, super engaging with how it uses World's new mechanics, and is overall just a treat to experience. With that said, my favorite track in Mario Kart World is Cheep Cheep Falls. Man, where do I even begin with this one? Well, let's start with the setting and theming. I already mentioned back when talking about Delfino Square that I love the vibrant colors of autumn, and Cheep Cheep Falls captures that wonderfully, mixing it nicely with the Japanese garden aesthetic and especially how the water looks in this track. If the Miiverse water guy was still around, I get the feeling he'd really like this one. And that's just racing on this track during the daytime. It's utterly gorgeous when racing at night. But while the aesthetics and theming are on point, that's only one part of why I love Cheep Cheep Falls. The other part is the track itself. It may not have much in regards to options for rail grinding or wall riding, but the part that ultimately wins me over with this track is how it utilizes a new mechanic I've yet to bring up: the on-water driving. So, full disclosure on that note, I'm overall not huge on the underwater driving in Mario Kart 7 and 8. There have been some neat set pieces used with it, such as in Squeaky Clean Sprint, but as a whole, not really one of my favorite mechanics in the series. So I admittedly wasn't too upset by being replaced with on-water driving in World, especially since, having played it, I really like the on-water driving in World. Granted, the tracks don't always use it to its fullest, but the looser, trickier controls, coupled with the nature of the waves, I find it really fun to master. And out of all the tracks that have on-water driving, Cheep Cheep Falls easily has the most captivating use of it. Having you plunge down a waterfall and then rush down windy river rapids, all the while avoiding Cheep Cheeps and the rocks in the water, or deliberately seeking them for trick opportunities, it's consistently a thrill to play. And while yes, rail grinding and wall riding opportunities are minimal, there are still some cool chances to utilize them, particularly with this portion on the river rapids. It can be tricky to get right, but it feels great when you do. And to end it off, we've got one of the most simple but also clever mushroom cut shortcuts in the game. At the end of the track, when you're riding the waters over to the starting line, there's a little land area you can cut through to save yourself some time. But with the pillars present, it's not a clear shot. You have to properly align yourself. But also with the boxes present, there's now a deliberate blind spot, obscuring some of the pillars and hiding any potential items that have been laid on the track. With just a couple little additions, this otherwise mindless shortcut now has an element of risk and reward, and I really like that. And I haven't even mentioned the music yet. Mixing together the more traditional Japanese instrumentation with the electric guitar, somehow matching both the peacefulness of the environment and the intensity of the river rapids, it's so good! It may not be the most movement heavy track in the game, but for me at least, everything Cheep Cheep Falls tackles with its design and theming, it does spectacularly. And even in the occasions when I'm eating dirt on this track, I never regret racing on it. So yeah, it took a while to pinpoint it as such, but Cheep Cheep Falls is definitely my favorite track in Mario Kart World. And with that, we're now at the end of this wild ride through the Mario Kart series. Gotta say, it was fun revisiting and reevaluating these games. If you had told me I'd become a Super Circuit fan through the process, I don't know if I'd have believed you, but here we are now. That said, I think I've had my fill with Mario Kart for the next little while. Now if you excuse me, I believe another kart racer launched fairly recently, so I'm off to go play that. This has been BenjaMage, thank you all for watching, and until the next video, have a nice day everybody!